Oh, are you me pretty fair maiden? Oh, are you me honey? Oh, are you pretty fair maiden? Oh, are you me honey? She answered me modestly, I am me mammy's darling, with me to run young father. When you found me the letter of you, when you come to my surgery,
Grimil Maigaf, agus Gramaigaf fan your heart. Shaw, I don't know, three da Jerry Sharton Peadar O'Donnell. To my hen, Costa Sean Ashla, but there three, but your Cabliana, agus to couple her, la couple of blian, to Danish, walk Noala Ashla Tomat, Costa Shaw, agus to Sean, agus Nelson Cole, Eddie O'Donnell, which was all like that, I don't know. My name is Michael Hall McGlassbeck. I'm an independent councillor for the Glanties electoral area. I've been on the Peadar O'Donnell committee now for the last, 3 years, Sean? 3-4 years, thereabouts. And Eddie Declan, who's just moved back home this last year and a half, even though that he likes to tell everybody he's a true dub. And that's okay, we'll allow that for now. And he just joined the committee there last year, the year before, and Sean O'Donnell, who's Peadar O'Donnell's grandnephew. Without him, there'd probably be no weekend, and I know he does most of the hard work. Eddie O'Donnell's not here. I'm not sure where he is. No doubt running around getting other stuff organised. Why? Well, I suppose if I was to be honest, this wasn't really on the agenda. This topic wasn't on the agenda for us this weekend. Was, well, anybody that is involved in committees will know that you have great ideas and you start putting them together and they become something totally different than what we started. But there was supposed to be another talk today, which was, the whole weekend was very much supposed to focus around women and women in struggle. It's the 100th anniversary of the Coming of Man, and we felt, not just because of the 100th anniversary of the Coming of Man, but we felt that we wanted to have a discussion around women and their participation in struggle. Need that be from working on co-ops, like Clary, very involved, and she'll speak about that tomorrow. She's one of the main speakers at the main talk tomorrow. Or women involved in, their choice issue, or that be, in the armed struggle or whatever, what people choose. But we ended up, my two aunts had done time in jail in England, and for one reason or another it didn't work out, so we pulled this together, if I was truthful, at the last minute. I had an interest in it as an independent activist for maybe since 2007, 2008. I was a member of Sinn Féin and left, and then I joined IRGI, and then after about a year or so I left, and I've been independent since. But during my election campaign, standing as an independent, I felt that there was no discussion about what does it actually mean to be independent, politically independent. And as we see, how you doing? As we see, there's a big push towards independence. We have a good enough tradition here in Donegal. We have independent TD Thomas Pringle, and there had been other independence TDs before that and councillors. But I felt that there needed to be a discussion during the elections. I really tried to have that discussion, but it was very, very difficult to have it through the media because they weren't that interested. And as myself and Declan were saying the other day, or the other week when we started talking about this, you could be independent and people automatically, well, I don't want to vote party, but I'll vote independent. What does that actually mean? You could be an independent fascist, and people think, well, sure, if there's an independent in front of your name, sure, that has to be progressive. And I suppose from our perspective here, it certainly is not. So it's kind of to tease that out, have a discussion on it, where people are coming from, and maybe not as much as, maybe touching on where that's going, but especially myself as a Socialist Republican, I'd like to have that discussion, around Socialist Republican and independent candidates. But it's not just defined, and maybe this is where we went wrong, maybe, that we shouldn't have had it as councillors or elected people up here. We should have had independent activists I still regard myself as an activist, you know, instead of the title as a councillor. I know Tommy there now, down there, who's doing fantastic work in Derry, and he's an independent activist, and Darren there is an independent councillor as well. And I forget your name? John. Sorry, John. So there's loads of people here who are doing fantastic work as independent activists. I don't know if Paul Gallagher's here or not, is he? He was to be here, and who is an independent councillor in Strabane. So we're going to start off and just kind of have that discussion, and it's fairly relaxed, and it's very important that that the audience participate in this, that it's not just sitting down there listening, people like me waffling on. So we'll start with Declan. Declan Bree. I know Declan this last couple of years. We speak more so on the phone than anything. He's from Sligo. He's a former TD. He was a TD for the Labour Party. I know that Declan was very involved in the Connolly movement in Sligo. Isn't that right, Declan? Still is. And for loads of different reasons, and no doubt we'll hear now, he's now an independent councillor and does a lot of work down in Sligo. John Campbell, to the right. Don't mean that in any other way, but they're sitting on the right here. Is an independent councillor now, and this is his second term, is it? And is the county mayor at the moment. And need I add, without me he wouldn't be. just like to say that.
I thank him every day.
He doesn't, but he should. And I would work very closely with John, as myself and John and Thomas Pringle. And Gary Donnelly, to my left, is an independent councillor from Derry. I know Gary, or more so I know of Gary for a very, very long time, and the work that he does and has done in Derry, and quite a lot of work at that. Darren, who's sitting down there, unfortunately I don't know a lot about you, Darren. I know that you're left Republican councillor in Derry, and no doubt he'll participate in this debate as it goes on. So we'll start with Declan, if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have to say that I'm very pleased to have been invited to say a few words at the Peadar O'Donnell weekend, and I'd like to pay tribute to Micheál and indeed all those involved in organising the event over the past number of years. I had the opportunity of meeting Peadar O'Donnell on a number of occasions. I first met him back in the late 60s when I was a member of the Connolly Youth Movement. I think it was at a demonstration outside the American Embassy over the war in Vietnam. I'm sure Eddie Declan was probably there on that occasion. And I met Peadar at other political events over the years, and he always showed an interest in what we were at in Sligo. However, I regret that I never took the time to spend any great length of time chatting to him about politics in his life. Peadar was particularly pleased back in 1985 when I wrote to him advising him that we had established a committee which was organising a centenary tribute to the memory of Jimmy Gralton, the Leitrim socialist who was deported from Ireland back in '33, and Gralton's story had been wiped from people's memory at that stage. And unfortunately, illness prevented Peadar from participating in the Gralton weekend, and within months of that event, Peadar passed away. And ironically, Jimmy Gralton never got on well with Peadar, and remarked at one stage after he first met him that O'Donnell would like to be the bridegroom at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. So, however, when the deportation order was made out against Gralton in '33, it was Peadar O'Donnell and his comrades who set about organising the national campaign against the deportation, and it was Peadar who travelled down to Leitrim to face the wrath of the local Gombe men and clergy when he attempted to address public meetings in support of Jimmy Gralton in South Leitrim. And history, in fact, will record that Jimmy Gralton was forever grateful to Peadar O'Donnell and to those other members of the Defence Committee who had the courage to stand with him in his hour of need. Micheál gave you a brief introduction to my background. I became involved in politics about 1967 in Sligo when I joined the Connolly Youth Movement. We established a branch of the movement then. The organisation was active up until the local elections of '74. We were established, I think, just after the local elections of '67. In the early '70s, we had a number of difficulties and differences with what was then Sligo Corporation, the local authority in the town. And I recollect on one occasion when we had a demonstration at the town hall that the then TD, Fianna Fáil TD, Ray McSharry, suggested or said that if we felt that we represented people in the community, we should go forward for election. So in '74, the approach of the local elections, the Connolly Youth branch in Sligo decided that we should contest it, but not as the Connolly Youth, because the Connolly Youth wasn't into electoral politics. So it was agreed that we would select an independent socialist youth candidate, and that we would seek broader support outside the CYM. And I was chosen as the candidate. Studying the elections, we were optimistic about getting a seat on the 12-person Sligo Corporation, but it was also agreed that I would contest the county council elections so as to give us an indication of what type of support we might have outside of the town. And amazingly, we won a seat on both local authorities at the time. So for the past 40 years, I've been an elected representative at local level. We had an independent socialist organisation there that functioned and became active during election periods. That developed in the 80s into the Independent Socialist Organisation, the Sligo Leitrim Independent Socialist Organisation. We contested elections over the next decade. Unfortunately, I was the only one that managed to get elected on each occasion, but we did run people in each of the electoral areas, but we were unsuccessful in getting additional seats. And it was 91, the Sligo Leitrim Independent Socialist Organisation decided to merge with the Labour Party. So I was in the Labour Party from 91 until I think it was 2004 or 3 or 4, and resigned from the Labour Party when they particularly decided that they were agreeable to going into coalition with Fine Gael. The entire branch that I was in and other branches retired en masse from the Labour Party. And I think it was a wise decision. So that gives you a background. While I was in the Labour Party for 12 or 13 years, I spent most of my life, in fact, political life, as an independent. And I suppose that's the subject matter of today's session. The Oxford Dictionary provides us with a number of definitions for independent. Free from outside control, not subject to another's authority, and not belonging to or supported by a political party. And I believe that the latter definition correctly describes the large number of independent Dáil deputies, senators and councillors which we have today in the country. I think it's worth noting that one cannot describe oneself as an independent candidate on the ballot paper. You can either leave that particular space blank, or you can be described as non-party. And I think we currently have about 25 independent TDs, stretching from Thomas Pringle, Mick Wallace, Vinnie McGrath on one side, to Noel Grealish, Michael Healy-Rae, Michael Lowry on the other. So a similar spectrum can be found at local government level. So essentially, the only thing that independent elected representatives have in common is that they don't belong to or are not supported by a political party. And since the collapse of the Celtic Tiger and the advent of austerity, there has been a significant swing away from the long-established political parties, the parties of austerity and their candidates. And there's been growing support from the electorate for non-party independent candidates, and also from candidates from the non-establishment parties, including Sinn Féin, Socialist Party, People Before Profit, etc. And I think it's very clear that a growing number of people are of the opinion that they were betrayed by the representatives of the establishment parties over the past number of years. Many, but not all of these people, tended to place the blame mistakenly on the party apparatus, whether it related to Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil or Labour, rather than on the ideology and politics of the party in question. And as an alternative, many opted to vote for independent non-party candidates regardless of the politics of the individual candidate. So currently, any candidate described as an independent can benefit from the disaffected section of the electorate. However, I think those of us who come from the Peadar O'Donnell tradition will certainly recognise the difference between elected representatives who reflect the views of the left and those who reflect the views of the right, whether these representatives are members of a political party or whether they're described as independent. In fact, up until the demise of the Celtic Tiger and the imposition of austerity, I'd say, and it certainly was my experience, that the great majority of independent representatives here were conservative and right of centre. And in this context, I think, I feel that those of us who come from the left Republican tradition have an obligation to expose, where possible, those independent or non-party representatives who in fact share the right-wing conservative ideology of the mainstream political parties and who at the same time attempt to portray themselves as something new or something different. I believe it's also important for us to recognise that if we're to assist in bringing about the type of political revolution that Peadar O'Donnell and his comrades sought, that it will be necessary for us to build a political alliance uniting socialists, trade unions, Republicans, community and environmental activists, an alliance which hopefully in due course could evolve into a party of socialism, an alliance which would put the needs of people before the interests of developers and bankers and speculators in business. I would say that today the class struggle is very intense and is taking place both on an ideological level and in the sustained attacks by the state on workers' wages, terms and conditions, and against those in welfare, pensioners, children, the sick and the elderly. The leadership of the Congress of Trade Unions has been exposed as never before to be hopelessly lost and confused. And for anybody who had any doubt about the class nature and role of the state, I think that doubt must now surely be removed. And for those of us, and more so I suppose for those on the left from a non-Marxist or social democratic or Republican tradition who may have seen the state as a neutral or benign force in the past, I would suggest that recent events, I think, must surely convince them of the error of their ways. Because all of us have witnessed an assault upon working conditions, income levies, dealt taxes, a tax upon pension benefits and rights, cuts in entitlements, cuts in public and social services are all being used to move and take money away from working people and give it to the very class who have driven the contradictions of this crisis. And, you know, I think there's clearly a need for a fundamental, radical, democratic transformation in the political and economic system of this country. And I think all of us can also see that the parties of the right and the forces of the establishment can cooperate and work hand in glove with each other so as to ensure that the interests of the ruling class are maintained and protected. And it has to be said that if we're to bring about their defeat, I think it's clear that we too must unite, build an alliance of our forces, and move towards the establishment of a movement uniting socialists, Republicans, trade unionists, community and environmental activists. Because today, right across the country, in almost every community, large or small, people are mobilising to fight the water charges. They're showing courage, determination and solidarity. They're refusing to be intimidated by the threats and lies of Irish Water, the government and other agencies of the state. And as each day passes, I believe it's becoming obvious that more and more activists are recognising the necessity to work together with the aim of defeating the government and in due course bringing about a radical transformation of Irish society. It has to be said that there's certainly a solid commitment among those on the left to building a society where working people will democratically control aspects of their lives. And at this stage in the struggle, I believe there's a particular responsibility and an onus on those of us from the left who are independent elected representatives to play our part in encouraging, through dialogue and struggle, the establishment of a genuine left alliance. In other countries, particularly in Latin America, but also in a number of European countries, there's been what can be described as a rebirth of the left, and clearly we can learn from their experiences. Today, I think it's important that we understand that all the anger which we have around us as a consequence of the water charges, the property taxes, the ongoing attacks on ordinary people, will do nothing unless it's converted into political, industrial, social and community action. And this action has in particular to be expressed politically. There's a challenge therefore for us to build a working alliance that can be lasting and sustainable and which hopefully can pave the way for the establishment of a movement which can break the power of the current establishment parties. Those parties, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Labour, have no intention of providing any type of real alternative to the right-wing economic policies we've had to suffer over the past number of years. And in this context, I believe that all of us from the Peadar O'Donnell tradition have an obligation to organise and to build a nationwide left alliance so as to provide ordinary working people with a genuine alternative, a left alternative that will provide a fundamental, radical, democratic transformation in our political and economic system.
Declan, and just to kind of add, I know that when we started Paul Gallagher, which I mentioned earlier, has just arrived. An independent councillor from Strabane, so Paul Finnehart. Next, we'll hear what John has to say.
Thanks, Michal. I suppose that looking at the title again, independent of what was a kind of a question posed, and I think Declan touched on it. What are you independent of? Well, you're independent of that influence of a party. And what does that mean? Well, for me, what I've seen practically in the short time that I've been involved in politics, very often it's used as a shield or as a cover. You know, and you have your elected representatives coming back to you telling you, well, I don't really agree with that, but it's our party policy. You know, continue to vote for me, but I'm going to implement something that is not in keeping with what I believe in or what you as people who elected me believe in. And I find that extremely disingenuous. I suppose my own political history, I began following Thomas Pringle as an independent councillor, would have followed him and joined Sinn Féin for the 3 years he was from 04 I think to 07 that he was part of Sinn Féin, and left the party with him for a similar reason, that at that stage there was talk after that election of going into power with Fianna Fáil, and that seemed to be the focus of the party. It seems to be the focus in my mind of all parties, this rush to what they describe as power. I think independents have a very different view of what power is. I think over the last year or two we've seen numerous occasions where the real power has been shown, because the power is and always has been with the people, and we've seen that with the revolts over the water charges, the household charge, elements of budgets that they were to bring in around medical cards and that. When the people spoke, they finally took cognizance of it. I feel with an independent that the voice of the people is more reflected, because if one of the descriptions there was that you didn't serve any other outside power, but in a way you do, because you serve the people. And I think that the independent must work harder, because two things on a practical level: we don't have the resources that the party has. So there's nobody handing me the pre-prepared speech telling me what the party line is and this is what you follow. And I find it very interesting when you come up against something like the water charges, something that affects the whole country, and you take any of the political parties. If you take the speech, the press release covered maybe on Donegal Daily by Fianna Fáil's Charlie McConalogue, Sinn Féin's Padraig McLaughlin, or any of the other, and take the first line and it'll say TD McConalogue said the following. Type that into the computer and Google it, and see that it comes up for the TD in Cork, it comes up for the TD in Wexford, and this is what fills our newspapers, you know. And we've formed this belief that these guys are working really hard. Look, he's talking about water, he's talking about child benefit, he's talking about this, he's talking about that. But that's what the party machine, that's the benefit, and very often I think the cover that politicians enjoy from the party machine is that it takes the onus off you to have an understanding of what's going on and really be in touch with what's going on. As an independent, we don't have that machine behind us, and therefore we have to be our own machine. And I think most definitely you see in people, I suppose my recently elected colleague, this was also my first election to run. I'd been co-opted into Thomas's seat when he got elected into the Dáil. But we have to put in that work ourselves and have a deeper understanding of what's going on. So whether it's the workings of council, we have to have a deeper understanding of that, because we can't rely on somebody who says, well, I've been there 25 years now, and there's plenty of them within the parties who will offer myself or Michal advice. You mentioned one of them, a certain councillor from Bundoran, who would be very forthcoming in helping you along in his way of thinking. But you have to do and make those decisions yourself. So I feel that you have a far closer connection with the work you're doing, but also you have to reflect and bring that back directly to the people that you're representing. Again, I think most of us of the left tradition in independent politics have a background in community work, and I know that it's a focus of my work is to be involved in communities and listen to communities through parish councils in different areas, and not to be there to just deliver the message of the party, but also to be there to deliver at times the reality, you know, the reality of we want this done or we think this should be done, and give them the reality that no, presently that just won't be done. Very often I think parties shy away from that. I suppose the other thing that I see is again this rush for power that I see, and I don't think you'll hear your independent TDs or your independent councillors talking about when I get into power. Because two things I've noticed is, one, you can affect massive change even at local level within the council. Bearing in mind what we do at council, or our remit is quite narrow. But I've seen where, as an individual councillor and maybe the only true independent on the previous council, that you could have massive effects on policy where you put in the work. And very often I see that as a weakness of the parties, is that they rely on being PR focused, on telling you through the media, on having polished speeches ready to tell you what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, as opposed to actually getting in there, find out how it can be done now. I'll give examples of our county development plan. I know as an independent, I read it from cover to cover, and when we were making changes to it, I know that there was many of them as we sat down in Lifford that day to look at it, I could hear the spine cracking as we were to make 123 decisions on how building and development, etc. would happen in the county over the next 8 years. They hadn't looked at one aspect of it, and they were looking to each other to see what way they would vote on the different aspects. And you can provide that leadership. We're presently reconvening the Education Training Board. Independents now have an equal representation in that with any of the political parties, and those of us and some who are on it within the trade union movement, we have met on a couple of occasions, and we've put forward on 2 occasions. The next occasion will be Monday. We'll put forward our proposal. The previous one was accepted without change because we were the only people who went into that meeting with the preparation done, with the work done. And I think that that's what you find again with independent councillors and politicians, is that if I don't have the work done, I'm sitting on a board or I'm sitting in the council chamber, and I might as well be sitting outside. So you do get I believe you get a far greater work rate from them, because we don't have that fallback. We don't have that, the party told me, the party made me do it, that excuse. As I said, I was focusing on power and that description of power. As I said, the power remains with the people who elect us or put us in or out. But also in between elections, as I said, we've seen that power with the water charges, with the household charge, where people have decided what they want from their political representatives. If there's a drawback to voting for independence, as Declan said, sometimes it's hard to find where they sit on the political spectrum. But also, I think if there's a drawback, I don't see it as a drawback, but some may see it. I think that your independent representative asks a lot more of you as a voter, as a member of the public, as a member of your community. Because we ask you to look into what we're doing. We ask you to come back to us and ask us the questions. And I definitely, through my time on council, it's been a focus of my work, is, and I think I would say Michael shares this, and I'm sure the two men, I don't know them as well, I've never got anybody anything. I've never done anything for anybody. But I have helped people to do it and access services for themselves. I've helped people access services where maybe their ability in reading or writing or something like that wouldn't allow them to do it. But I've never told anybody, I got you that. And I think that's another common thread that I see running through independent politicians, as opposed to some of the parties that focus. You remember that this old, I would describe this Fianna Fáil type thing, I got you your house, I got you that road tarred, I got you this, I got you that. And that again plays into their sense of what power is. The latest one that really sticks in my craw is over the water charges, where I've heard a certain party who claims to represent the left tell us, put us into power and then we'll fix your problems. And as I said, that won't happen. To be absolutely honest about it, I think if anyone believes that won't happen. Put us into power and then we'll fix your problems. The people, I think, are speaking at the moment on how they see Irish water and that playing out. And that doesn't involve putting anybody into power. In fact, what it probably involves is putting those that are in power presently out. I think, again, we do, as an independent, explanations of what we stand for, and that can sometimes be more difficult for us to get through on the media and get through to people. Very often I find if you're explaining something, you're losing the argument, because if somebody has a quick line to explain who I am. He is this or he is that, he has done this, he has done that. That's very easy to comprehend for the ordinary person. And if I have to sit down and explain why, as an independent, I believe that I'll give you better representation, I think very often you're losing that argument, no matter how good or strong the argument is. I do, again, as an independent, I suppose, I think the workload that we have in dealing with constituency issues where we don't have that backup can make it difficult to really come out of, say, a 5-year term and say, well, I did change this element of policy, because it can be quite difficult to get into those elements of policy in enough depth to make those changes. But I do feel that our next government will have an independent element to it, and I do think that it won't be of the Jackie Healy-Rae type element, because again I think that confusion unfortunately is there. Is one of the things that again galls me, that you have that confusion when you're an independent like Jackie Healy-Rae, where they haven't looked at what you stand for, what you believe in, or the work that you've done. And I think like that, again, and this will take time, I think it's as an independent we are forcing people, the public in general, to take more interest in who they are actually electing, because two of the main reasons I've seen that people have elected representatives over the years is, one, he or she is a nice guy or girl, and secondly, well, I've always voted Fianna Fáil, my parents voted it, or Fine Gael, or whichever other party, and I think that level of engagement on the part of the people has to increase, that they look at exactly what are we independent of, or why are we independent. And I think it's, again, a very good question, because it's a question, as I sit along with 10 other independents, I know that some of them are as far away as the moon from where I stand on issues. I think there is a symbolism within the County Council of having nearly 25% or over 25% of our elected representatives as independents. I think that's positive. I think it's the first step along the way, and now those of us who have been elected as independents and those who voted independents in have to start looking and weeding out those that I feel represent the party system and will gladly join the party in the morning for the cover of having the machine behind them. But hopefully there'll be more questions from the floor.
Good morning, John.
Nothing left to say, really, is there?
Thought you were left.
I'd like to thank Micheál and the organising committee for inviting me. However, I don't know how Peadar O'Donnell would feel, particularly as he said he left expressed wishes for his funeral that there would be no priests, no pomp, and no politicians. But I suppose it's maybe a different type of politicians that he was referring to. I've described myself as a Republican, born and bred Derry. Got involved in Republican politics at an early age. I remember the first council elections. Was a member of Sinn Féin. And I stayed with Sinn Féin until 1998. And by that stage, the party that I had joined had become virtually unrecognisable. It had sort of morphed into the SDLP. I left after much thinking and sleepless nights, because it's not easy when you put your heart and soul into an organisation and you decide to walk away from that. So eventually I knew I was doing the right thing and I left Sinn Féin. I then joined the 32 County Sovereignty Movement. Now, the 32 County Sovereignty Movement was initially a group which was set up within Sinn Féin to protect the sovereignty issue. And if anybody knows Sinn Féin, or they don't take too kindly to dissent. And once you make the wrong noises, you quickly become demonised, ostracised, and marginalised. So some people were thrown out of the party. Some people left the party. I left. And I suppose I was always interested in social justice and community work and the work that Sinn Féin had been doing with the communities and standing up for the communities. There was no issue. But however, when it became more and more ingrained with the system, it changed. You know, their goals, their whole attitude changed. So after a while, you know, by talking to people, I eventually got over the marginalisation, the demonisation, and got involved in a number of campaigns, social justice, prisoners, the Raytheon campaign, where members of the Sovereignty Movement and Derry Anti-War Coalition took over the Raytheon arms manufacturing plant in Derry, and we more or less closed it down, since left the city. Talking to people on the ground, realised that there was a gap, that there was a void. There was also almost a demand for, you know, there was a section of the community that wasn't being represented. You know, as Sinn Féin moved more and more away from the grassroots, there was a large section of the community. Basically, they were ostracised and marginalised too, because, you know, if you asked a question, then you're a troublemaker. So I stood for election, I think it was 7 years ago, and received 500 votes. 4 years ago, I got 600 votes, and then this year I stood in election and almost doubled the vote and got elected. Now, as a Republican, I don't see myself as going in that council to make the council work. I see both governments, North, you know, in the 6 counties and 26 counties, as dysfunctional. I see two dysfunctional, illegitimate states with dysfunctional government. So I'm not into politics in the sense to, you know, make the 6 counties workable. And I would have the same attitude with the 26 counties. You know, it's not my interest as a Republican to see, you know, 2 separate states on the island. So really, that's where I'm not really accustomed to public speaking. Most of the work that I do is done on the ground, not in the council. You know, it's fighting for the rights of people who I would feel don't have a voice. They're not represented by either the SDLP or Sinn Féin, you know, because there's very little difference between them. But there's a growing proportion of people, you know, who are becoming alienated and feel that they don't have a voice. So it's really in them terms that's where I'm coming from. And the new council now takes in Derry and Strabane, and there's 4 councillors. There's 40 councillors on the body, and independents have 4 seats on it, which is roughly 10%. And I think it's harder in the 6 counties to break into that, you know, to break that mould, because it's very tribal. You know, one of the things that you will be told is that if you step outside the tribe, you're in fact almost on the other side. So I think it's harder for independents to break the mould in the 6 counties. Now, there is other independent councillors dotted around the 6 counties, but I think there's no doubt that the rise of independence in the 26 counties has played into that, you know, psychic where people can say, we can, you know, we don't need the party apparatus, we don't need the party system. I think the party model has failed people. I think wherever you have a central committee, it's open for, you know, manipulation and corruption. Now, that's not to say that anybody who's independent isn't open to corruption, but I think, you know, if you're independent, you've nowhere to hide. You have no party system that will bring you in and cover up, and, you know, even if they move you sideways or replace you. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on independence, and I take the points that just because you're independent doesn't mean that it's a good thing. You know, it depends what you're independent from and what you're, you know, basically what you're trying to achieve. You know, because Wally Fraser stood as an independent. You know, and Wally Fraser would be a right-wing bigot, but because you put that badge independent, it doesn't necessarily make, you know, it's a good thing to vote for. So really, that's all. You know, I would be interested in questions or whatever. That's all that I can add at the minute.
That's great. Good morning, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of it, just listening to the three speakers for myself anyway, and I think what Declan touched on earlier on is about, I suppose, some alliance. I wouldn't be into a new party, and I don't think Declan's suggesting that in any shape or form, but certainly I think it'd be very interesting to look at the possibilities of kind of developing some kind of movement or broad movement between the left and left Republicans, north and south of the border. And I think Gary said something there earlier on. We were just talking about, I'm not sure what we were talking about somebody being partitionist. And he asked John, was the independent, what do you call the
network?
Independent network, was that partitionist? I'll be honest, I've been to one of the meetings and I couldn't really answer it, to be honest with you, but John's told me that they're not. And I know I've talked to Gary this last couple of weeks. I'm not sure if I said to you, Declan, or not, maybe it was John, but I think it's something that we maybe look at some stage from a Northwest perspective for a start, to pull together, but and look at common grounds that we could work as independent left Republicans, on certain issues, and I think that would be of value. But like I said at the beginning, I think one of the mistakes we done here was that we didn't include independent activists like Tommy there, and there's loads of other independent activists within our own community and county to hear their views, because it shouldn't be left to politicians, because and I said this right through the whole election, and and have been saying it for years, because change won't come from politicians, change will come from us. And that means going out on the ground, and as John was saying, that we need to engage more in the community and get the community to ask more questions of what does that actually mean to be independent. So if you have the Willie Frasers of this world, or what do you call your man's a TD now, he was a Senate, Shane Ross, knows very clearly off the right, that doesn't benefit us as a community. I don't believe from my own perspective that we benefit from that. So I think there has to be a wider discussion around what does it mean to be independent, and hopefully maybe this will help in some small way to create that discussion. I'd be very interested to hear from people. I know a good number of people here. There's a lot of us I don't know at all, not even to see. So it'd be interesting to hear what people have to say or suggestions. I know Michael down the back there, mad eager to contribute. Michael is an